Picture the mud, the choking smoke, the absolute deafening roar of artillery. We're in June 1815, and the fields of Belgium are just soaked in rain and blood. The Duke of Wellington is desperately scanning the horizon, right? He's waiting for Blücher's Prussians, but they don't arrive in time. You see, the torrential rain from the night before, which historically trapped Napoleon's legendary artillery in deep mud, well, in this alternate reality, it cleared up just enough for his cannons to move. The French cavalry breaks through. The Allied line shatters. Napoleon wins.
Now, in our timeline, that door slammed shut for good. Napoleon was forced into exile, and the old powers of Europe finally got to rebuild their conservative world. But history doesn't always continue on a predictable, straight path. History bends. In this alternate reality, the news of a French victory at Waterloo hits the capitals of Europe like an absolute thunderbolt. Nations panic. Monarchs literally tremble. Exhausted, battered armies have to rapidly, desperately regroup, while the ghost they thought they had just buried rises right back up from the smoke.
Section 1. The hinge of history. A door left wide open. By 1815, Napoleon wasn't just fighting a standard military campaign. After his totally audacious escape from exile on the tiny island of Elba, literally slipping past British guard ships to reclaim the French throne without firing a single shot, he was fighting for his very survival. He was fighting for absolute revenge, and really for the resurrection of his entire legacy against a world that had completely united to destroy him.
Waterloo was the final lock on a door that had already been closing around an age of revolution, empire, fear, ambition, and blood. And for the everyday European farmer or merchant, this wasn't some abstract geopolitical game. It was a desperate plea for an end to decades of conscription and burned-down villages. The stakes here were never merely military. The fate of the French Empire, and honestly the future shape of Europe, hung entirely on whether the single bloody Sunday afternoon could shatter the massive anti-French coalition once and for all.
So let's look at the tipping point. The margins of victory at Waterloo were incredibly, unbelievably fragile. We're talking about tiny variables, like General Grouchy arriving at the exact right moment to trap the enemy, or heavy rain severely delaying Blücher's Prussian reinforcements from ever even reaching the field, or Marshal Ney coordinating the French cavalry with devastating effectiveness, causing Wellington's line to crack under the sheer weight of French steel, rather than that catastrophic unsupported charge he historically led. Any single one of these moments could have easily tipped the outcome into a French victory.
And if any of those variables flip, the whole outcome flips. And suddenly, the entire psychological foundation of the coalition collapses. See, the Allies desperately needed a conclusive, undeniable defeat to prove the Emperor was finally finished. A French win would absolutely terrify Europe with the cold, hard realization that Napoleon was still very much alive as a dominating political and military force, a force completely capable of bleeding the great powers dry on his own terms.
Section 2. Europe panics, the shockwave across the continent. We have to move fast here. Just like the dispatch riders who would have been galloping across Europe, spreading pure, breathless geopolitical panic from capital to capital as the unbelievable news arrived.
What's truly fascinating here is how isolated, yet completely connected these national reactions are. Take Britain. Stunned and humiliated, they'd face prolonged economic pressure and maritime containment. Remember, Britain bankrolled this coalition, and another defeat would strain their treasury to the breaking point. Then you have Prussia. They're furious, with their military culture hardening into an aggressive, retaliatory German nationalism. Meanwhile, Austria and Russia are deeply alarmed, but highly cautious. They're weighing the exhausting, crippling costs of a prolonged war, and suddenly seeking stability over a total, bloody victory.
So every court in Europe is suddenly confronting this terrifying question. If Napoleon can defeat the Allied armies again, how many more times can he survive? It's basically the 19th century equivalent of a massive global market crash. Financial markets would wobble violently. Monarchs would scramble for emergency security measures, clamping down hard on civil liberties. Why? Because Napoleon was never just a general. He was an idea, a living, breathing, infectious symbol of revolution, meritocracy, and hyper-centralized power that threatened literally every traditional crown on the continent.
This forces the exhausted coalition into a brutal dilemma. Option A: do they escalate? Do they launch yet another massive, endless invasion to aggressively partition France and wipe it off the map of great powers? Or option B: do they seek negotiation? A tensed, bitter diplomatic exit driven by over a decade of profound political and military fatigue. Because when total victory is suddenly wiped off the table, diplomacy returns out of sheer necessity. They'd be forced to sit across from the exact man they'd just declared an international outlaw.
Section 3.
The emperor's choice, the price of a second chance. Let's slow down for a second and step right into the mind of the emperor himself, who now finds himself in a drastically strengthened yet incredibly complex strategic position back in Paris.
Because it really all comes down to one man. Number one. One human being whose emotional reaction could redirect the fate of an entire continent. Would he be humbled by this near disaster of a battle, finally realizing his aging army just couldn't sustain endless war? Or would he be completely blinded by overconfidence from a miraculous victory? Historically, Napoleon's hubris in Russia cost him hundreds of thousands of men. So this single mind, capable of both brilliant administration and catastrophic vanity, now holds the keys to Europe's future. He essentially faces two radically different paths here. Does he choose peace, accepting strict territorial limits, focusing on preserving France, and leaving a lasting domestic legacy? Or does he choose war, rebuilding momentum, pushing his exhausted enemies, and risking a destructive cycle of victory and exhaustion? Restraint might have actually saved him, but his mind was fundamentally built for relentless expansion. His entire career proved that he equated stagnation with death, making any peace deeply, inherently unstable. Plus, he's returning to a highly fractured French reality. Yes, a miraculous victory revives the prestige of the imperial system and immediately silences many of his immediate doubters and hesitating supporters. But beneath the surface, the royalists still deeply hate him, the Republicans still distrust his absolute power, and everyday civilians just want the endless chaos to finally stop. Victory gives Napoleon a dramatic second win, sure, but it merely postpones France's deep internal divisions, temporarily masking them under the blinding glare of renewed imperial authority.
Section 4. Rewriting the 19th century, a world under the shadow of the emperor. Let's zoom out to the macro level and see how this immediate aftermath builds into the long-term, global consequences of a French-dominated continental system.
In this altered 19th century timeline, surviving Waterloo in 1815 prevents a clean restoration of the old monarchic order. The Congress of Vienna produces a much weaker, less final settlement. Fast forward to the 1830s and 1848, and those famous European revolutions spread entirely differently, fueled or suppressed by French influence rather than Austrian conservatism. And by the late 19th century, the fluid road to German and Italian unification is radically altered. For example, a unified Germany might have formed much earlier and way more aggressively as a direct defense against a living, breathing Napoleonic empire right next door.
And the ripples? They go global, directly shaping the world you live in today. This is the ultimate butterfly effect. Modern nationalism develops under the pressure of a living Napoleon, not a fallen one. The Napoleonic Code spreads even deeper into centralized continental administration. Crucially, Britain shifts its focus to counter France, which alters Atlantic trade and directly impacts the Americas. The world map you know today, global colonial strategies, investments, even the early expansion and foreign policy of the United States, is entirely redirected by European instability in totally unpredictable ways. It fundamentally rewrites our understanding of the era. As this historical perspective so perfectly captures, it becomes a warning rather than an ending. Instead of Waterloo being shorthand for final defeat, the last pathetic gasp of an overreaching conqueror, it becomes the terrifying beginning of a second imperial act, a stark, undeniable reminder that the arc of history doesn't always favor the status quo. Proof that history can, for a time at least, be completely reversed.
Which brings us to the ultimate question of this explainer. Would Europe ever be the same? Well, based on the fractured coalitions, the altered political architecture, and the relentless ambition of one man, the answer is almost certainly no. But the real question is this. If Napoleon had lived to rewrite the 19th century, drawing different borders and sparking different rivalries, would the 20th century have even recognized the concept of a world war?